The wind was cold that morning as Lena walked down the narrow dirt road leading to the small cafe where she worked. Her shoes were old and thin, the soles worn down so much that she could feel the rough stones beneath her feet. She didn't mind the pain anymore. She had felt worse things in life. What really hurt was seeing her mother coughing all night and not being able to afford the medicine she needed. Lena was only 22, but her eyes carried the weight of someone much older. Since her father passed away when she was just a teenager, life had never been easy. Her mother had fallen sick shortly after, and her younger brother, who was only 12, still went to school. Every day, Lena woke up before sunrise, cooked a small meal for them, and then walked almost an hour to the cafe. The cafe wasn't fancy, just a small place at the edge of the town square where workers stopped for tea and bread before heading to their jobs. Lena worked there from morning until evening, washing dishes, cleaning tables, and serving customers. She earned just enough to buy food and sometimes medicine when her mother's cough got worse. Despite her hard life, Lena never complained. She had a quiet strength about her. People in the town liked her because she was polite and hardworking. Even when customers were rude or impatient, she always smiled and said thank you, but deep inside, she often wondered if life would ever change. One evening, after a long day, Lena sat on the steps outside her small house made of wood and tin. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky orange and pink. Her brother Tom was doing his homework beside her. Their mother was resting inside, too weak to get up. Lena stared at the fading sunlight and whispered to herself, "Maybe one day things will be better." A few days later, a charity event was announced in town. It was a fundraiser for an orphanage nearby. The cafe owner, Mr. Reed, decided to take part and sent Lena to help serve tea and pastries at the event. It was held in the community hall and many people came, local business owners, teachers, and a few wealthy people from the city. Lena wore her cleanest dress, which was still simple but neat. She tied her hair back and smiled as she served guests. It was there that she first met Mr. Harold Dawson. He didn't look like the kind of man who would usually come to a small-town charity event. He was tall with silver hair and a gentle face. His clothes were expensive but not showy. There was a calmness about him, the kind that made people feel comfortable in his presence. He sat quietly at one of the corner tables, watching everything with kind eyes. When Lena approached his table with a tray of teacups, he looked up and smiled. "Thank you, young lady," he said softly. "You're welcome, sir," Lena replied, placing the cup carefully before him. He studied her for a moment, noticing the tiredness in her eyes despite her warm smile. "You work here?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I help with serving," she said, not wanting to sound like she was complaining about her life. "You seem very dedicated," he said kindly. "It's rare to see such patience these days." Lena smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir. I just do what I can." He nodded and didn't ask more questions, but his gentle tone stayed in her mind. As the evening went on, Harold stayed until the event ended. Before leaving, he approached the cafe owner to thank him for the service and quietly asked about the young woman who had been helping all evening. Mr. Reed told him a bit about Lena's situation, that she worked hard to support her sick mother and her brother. Harold listened, his expression thoughtful. The next morning, as Lena was sweeping the cafe floor, she saw a familiar car stop outside. It was Harold's. She quickly put down the broom and wiped her hands on her apron. He stepped out smiling. "Good morning," he said kindly. "Good morning, sir. Can I get you something?" "Yes, a cup of tea, please," he said, sitting by the window. As she served him, he asked about her family. Lena hesitated at first, then told him the truth, how her mother's illness had drained their savings, how she tried her best to keep things together. She didn't sound like she wanted pity. She spoke calmly, as if she had already accepted her struggles. Harold listened quietly, nodding now and then. "You're a brave young woman," he said finally. "Not everyone would carry so much responsibility with such grace." Lena blushed slightly. "Thank you, sir. I just try to do what's right." From that day, Harold became a regular visitor at the cafe. Every few days, he would stop by for tea and spend a few minutes talking with Lena. At first, she thought he was just being kind, but over time, she realized he genuinely enjoyed their conversations. He never treated her as a poor girl. He listened when she spoke and shared small stories about his life, how he used to run a business in the city, how he lost his wife years ago, and how he now lived alone in a quiet house on the outskirts. One afternoon it began to rain heavily. The cafe was almost empty when Harold came in, slightly wet from the rain. Lena quickly brought him a towel and a hot cup of tea. "You didn't have to come in this weather," she said. He smiled warmly. "I wanted some good tea." "And good company," she laughed softly. "Well, you'll get both here." They talked for nearly an hour that day. Harold asked about her dreams. Lena said she once wanted to study nursing but had to stop school after her father's death. "I just want a normal life," she said. "To take care of my family. To sleep without worrying what tomorrow will bring." Harold looked at her for a long moment. "You deserve that and much more," he said quietly. Over the next few weeks, Harold began helping her in small ways. He paid for her mother's medicine without being asked. When Lena tried to refuse, he told her gently, "Sometimes, letting others help is also a kind of strength." Word spread in the town that the old businessman was spending a lot of time at the cafe, and people began to whisper. Some said he felt sorry for the poor girl. Others thought he was just lonely. Lena heard the rumors but tried to ignore them. She only saw him as a kind old man who had a good heart. One evening, Harold visited her home to bring medicine personally. Lena's mother was embarrassed at first but thanked him with tears in her eyes. He didn't stay long, but before leaving, he looked around the small house and said softly, "You've built a home with love. That's something money can't buy." After he left, Lena sat in silence for a long time. She didn't understand why his words touched her so deeply. Maybe it was because for the first time someone had looked at her life and seen something good in it. Weeks turned into months. Harold's visits became part of her routine. He often brought small gifts. Books for her brother, fruits for her mother, and sometimes fresh flowers for Lena. But what mattered most wasn't the gifts. It was the way he treated them, with respect and warmth. One afternoon, as they sat outside the cafe watching the children play in the street, Harold said quietly, "You remind me of someone I once knew, someone who believed kindness could change the world." Lena smiled. "Did it?" He chuckled softly. "Not the whole world, but it changed mine." That evening, when Lena returned home, she found her mother smiling for the first time in a long while. "That man," her mother said, "he looks at you with care. Not pity, real care." Lena shook her head, embarrassed. "He's just a friend, Mama, nothing more." Her mother smiled knowingly. "Maybe, but sometimes life surprises us when we least expect it." Life continued like that for some time. Then one day, Harold invited Lena and her family to a dinner at a small restaurant. It wasn't a fancy place, just quiet and warm. He said it was to celebrate her mother's recovery. During the dinner, Harold spoke gently about his late wife and how lonely his life had become after her passing. He talked about how meeting Lena had brought light back into his days. Lena didn't know what to say. She felt both grateful and confused. There was something in his eyes, a mixture of affection and sadness. That night after they got home, Lena couldn't sleep. She thought about Harold's words and how different her life had become since meeting him. She wasn't sure what he truly wanted, but deep inside, she felt a sense of safety around him, something she hadn't felt in years. Days later, Harold stopped by the cafe again. He looked thoughtful, almost nervous, which was unusual for him. When Lena brought him his usual tea, he smiled faintly and said, "I have something important to tell you soon." Lena looked at him curiously. "Something good?" He chuckled softly. "I hope so." As he left, he turned back and said, "Lena, sometimes life gives us chances that don't make sense to others. But what matters is what's in our heart." She didn't fully understand what he meant, but that evening, as the sun set and the wind whispered through the trees, Lena felt a quiet change in the air, as if something big was about to happen. Lena woke up early that morning, though she had barely slept the night before. Harold's words kept replaying in her mind. "I have something important to tell you soon." She didn't know what he meant, but the way he said it had left her heart restless. At the cafe that morning, everything looked the same. The smell of coffee, the chatter of regular customers, the sound of cups clinking. But inside, Lena felt different. Every time the door opened, she looked up, expecting to see Harold's familiar face. Hours passed and he didn't come. She told herself he might be busy, but by the end of the day, she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was changing. The next afternoon, when the cafe was quiet, Harold finally walked in. He was wearing his usual gray coat, but there was a new seriousness in his eyes. He greeted her kindly and sat down at his regular table near the window. "Good afternoon," she said with a small smile. "I was starting to think you forgot about us today." He smiled faintly. "I could never forget. I was just thinking." She placed a cup of tea in front of him and sat across for a moment. "Thinking about what?" He hesitated before answering. "About life, Lena, and about choices." She didn't know what to say. His tone was calm but carried a kind of sadness. After a few moments of silence, he looked directly at her. "Lena," he began softly, "you have brought peace to my life in a way I didn't think was possible anymore. You remind me that kindness still exists in this world. You've given me something I thought I'd lost a long time ago, a reason to care again." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "I don't know what to say, sir. You've been so kind to me and my family. I'll never forget it." He took a slow breath. "There's more I want to do. But before that, I need to ask you something." She frowned slightly. "What is it?" He looked nervous, almost like a younger man trying to find the right words. Finally, he said quietly, "I want you to marry me." Lena froze. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. "Marry you?" she repeated in shock. He nodded. "I know how it sounds, Lena. I know I'm an old man and you're young. I don't expect you to love me the way you would love someone your age. But I do love you, deeply and sincerely. I want to take care of you, your mother, and your brother. I want to give you a life where you don't have to suffer every day. Not because I pity you, but because you deserve better." Lena's throat tightened. She didn't know what to feel. Her mind was spinning. Marriage? To a 73-year-old man? "Sir," she said softly, her hands trembling, "you've done enough for us. You don't owe me anything." He shook his head. "It's not about owing. It's about choice. I've lived a long life, Lena. I've had money, success, and loss. But none of it ever made me truly happy. When I see you, I see honesty. I see warmth. And for the first time in years, I feel like I'm not alone anymore." Tears welled in Lena's eyes. "But people will talk. They already do." He smiled sadly. "Let them. People always talk. But when we're gone, only our actions remain." She sat there silently, her heart heavy. She didn't know what to say. She respected Harold deeply, but marriage? That was something she had never imagined. That night, she couldn't eat. Her mother noticed her quietness and asked what was wrong. Lena hesitated, then told her everything. Her mother listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When Lena finished, her mother sighed softly and took her hand. "My child," she said gently, "I know this sounds strange to you, but that man, he has a good heart. You can see it. He's not trying to use you or hurt you. Maybe he really does care. Sometimes life sends us blessings in strange forms." Lena frowned. "But Mama, he's 73. He's old enough to be my grandfather." Her mother smiled weakly. "Age doesn't always decide love. Sometimes it's about two souls finding each other when they both need peace. You've struggled your whole life, Lena. You deserve kindness, but what will people say?" Her mother looked into her eyes. "People don't feed us, do they? They don't stay up all night when I'm sick. They don't see your pain, only we do. So don't live for them." Lena stayed awake the whole night staring at the cracked ceiling. She thought about her mother's words. She thought about Harold's gentle eyes, his patience, the way he always treated her with respect. But she also thought about how the town would see her, a poor young girl marrying a rich old man. By morning, she still hadn't made up her mind. When Harold came to the cafe the next day, he didn't pressure her. He simply said, "Take all the time you need, Lena. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it." Days passed. Lena kept working, trying to act normal, but her heart was never calm. Every time she saw her mother smile because of the medicine Harold had bought, every time her brother came home with new school books, she felt torn between gratitude and guilt. Finally, one evening she went to Harold's house. It was the first time she had been there. The place was beautiful but quiet, too quiet, like it had forgotten what laughter sounded like. He welcomed her with his usual kindness and offered tea. She looked nervous but determined. "I've been thinking a lot," she began softly. "You've been good to me and my family. You've shown us kindness when no one else did. I don't know what the right decision is, but I know one thing. I trust you. And if you really want to marry me, I will." Harold's eyes softened and he took a deep breath. "Are you sure, Lena? I don't want you to feel forced." "I'm sure," she said, her voice trembling. I don't know what the future holds, but I believe you mean well. And I want to help you the same way you helped me." He nodded slowly, his eyes moist. "You've just given me the greatest gift of my life." The news spread through town like wildfire. Some people congratulated her with forced smiles. Others whispered behind her back. "She's marrying him for money," they said. "That poor girl just found her way out." Lena heard every cruel word, but she stayed silent. She reminded herself that she wasn't doing this out of greed. She was doing it because she believed in kindness, his and hers. The wedding was small and simple, just as Harold wanted. There were only a few guests, her mother, her brother, and a few close friends. Harold's smile never faded throughout the ceremony. When he placed the ring on her finger, his hands shook slightly, but his eyes were full of warmth. Lena felt a strange mix of emotions. She was nervous, uncertain, but also calm, as if some invisible hand was guiding her. After the ceremony, Harold's driver took them to his home. That night, the mansion felt less lonely. The lights were warm, the rooms filled with the soft sound of laughter for the first time in years. Lena's mother cried when she hugged her daughter goodbye. "Be happy, my child," she said. "You've given him a reason to live again." Over the next few days, Lena began to adjust to her new life. The house staff treated her kindly, though she could feel their surprise. Some of them looked at her with curiosity, others with quiet respect. Harold made sure she felt comfortable. He told her she didn't have to change anything. She could still visit her mother, still work if she wanted, still be herself. But Lena felt awkward at first. She wasn't used to luxury. She didn't know how to act in a house where everything shined and meals were served on silver plates. She often helped the maid clean, even though she didn't need to. When Harold noticed, he laughed gently. "You don't have to work anymore, Lena," he said one evening as they sat in the garden. "I know," she replied, smiling, "but it makes me feel normal. I'm not used to sitting still." He nodded, understanding. "That's one of the things I admire about you. You don't pretend to be someone you're not." They spent evenings talking for hours. Harold told her about his youth, how he built his first business with nothing but determination, how he lost his wife years ago and never thought he'd find peace again. Lena listened quietly, fascinated by his stories. One night he said softly, "You know, Lena, everyone thought I was crazy for wanting to start my first company at 40. But I did it anyway. People will always judge what they don't understand." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe that's why you understand me." He smiled. "Maybe so." As days turned into a week, Lena began to notice small things about Harold. The way he smiled when she entered the room. The way he always waited for her before eating. The way he looked out the window at sunset, lost in thought. But she also noticed something else. He often went to his study alone and stayed there for hours. Sometimes she heard him talking softly on the phone. Other times she saw letters on his desk with unfamiliar handwriting. He would quickly fold them away whenever she entered. At first she thought it was business, but once when he didn't know she was nearby, she saw him holding an old photograph. He looked at it for a long time, his eyes wet, then quietly placed it in a drawer. That image stayed with her. She wanted to ask but didn't want to seem intrusive. Late one night she found him sitting in the garden under the stars. He looked peaceful but tired. "You're still awake?" she asked softly. He smiled. "Couldn't sleep. Old men don't need much rest." She sat beside him. "You think too much," he chuckled. "Maybe. I've had a lot to think about lately." They sat in silence for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Lena, do you ever wonder if fate is real?" She looked at him curiously. "Maybe. Why?" "Because sometimes life brings two people together for a reason. Maybe it's not love in the way people imagine it, but something deeper. A connection that changes both lives." Lena nodded slowly. "I think I understand." He turned to her and smiled faintly. "Then I'm glad." That night as she went to bed, she couldn't shake off the feeling that Harold was hiding something. Not something bad, but something sad. And she was right. The first week of Lena's married life passed quietly, yet every day brought her a mix of comfort and confusion. She was now living in a world so different from the one she had known all her life. A house with soft carpets instead of cracked floors, food that never ran out, clothes that smelled of flowers, and silence that felt both peaceful and strange. Harold treated her with nothing but kindness. He made sure she was never uncomfortable, never lonely, and never made to feel small. Every morning he would greet her with a smile and ask how she slept. Every evening he would join her for tea in the garden, where they talked about small things, the weather, the sound of birds, or the flowers blooming around them. But despite his warmth, there was something mysterious about him. Sometimes in the middle of their conversations he would drift away, as if lost in another time. His eyes would go distant and his hands would tremble slightly when he thought she wasn't looking. Lena noticed, but she never asked. She didn't want to invade his thoughts. One morning, while Harold was out meeting someone, Lena wandered through the large house, still amazed by how quiet it always was. The walls were covered with photographs, some of Harold as a young man shaking hands with business partners, standing beside tall buildings, smiling proudly. But there was one picture that caught her attention more than any other. It was an old photograph of a woman, perhaps in her 30s, with kind eyes and a soft smile. She looked familiar in a way Lena couldn't explain. When Harold returned, she gently asked, "Who's the woman in the picture near your study?" He paused for a moment before answering, "That was my wife. Her name was Clara. She passed away many years ago." Lena felt her heart sink. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He gave a small smile. "Don't be. She was a good woman. We had a beautiful life together, but fate had other plans." Lena didn't press further, but that night she kept thinking about that woman. Maybe that was why Harold sometimes looked sad. Maybe he still missed her. The next day, Harold had to attend a small business meeting in the city. Before leaving, he told Lena to rest and not worry about anything. "If you need anything, just ask Peter," he said, referring to his driver. After he left, the house felt emptier than ever. Lena tried to distract herself by reading a book from Harold's library, but her eyes kept wandering toward the door of his study. It was always locked when he wasn't around, which made her curious. She told herself it wasn't her place to go in. But a quiet voice inside whispered, "What was he hiding?" The thought stayed with her until late afternoon. Finally, she stood up and walked slowly toward the study door. To her surprise, it wasn't locked that day. She hesitated, then pushed it open gently. The room smelled of old books and paper. Sunlight streamed through the large window, dust floating in the air. The desk was neatly arranged, but there were piles of old letters and documents stacked at the corner. On one side there was a wooden box with a small lock, and next to it, a single envelope with her name written neatly on it. Her heart skipped. Why would he have a letter with her name? Her hands trembled as she picked it up. She hesitated for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a letter written in Harold's familiar handwriting. It read, "My dear Lena, if you are reading this, it means you have finally found what I could not bring myself to tell you. There are truths in my life I have kept hidden, not out of deceit, but because I wanted you to see me not as a man with a past, but as someone trying to make peace before time runs out. By the time you read this, you might already suspect that I am not well. The truth is, I have been sick for quite some time. The doctors say I do not have long to live. I didn't tell you earlier because I didn't want you to feel pity. I wanted our time together to be real, not shadowed by sadness. You may also find documents in this drawer. They are all in your name. The house, the accounts, the small businesses I still own. I have transferred them to you. This is not a gift. It is my way of saying thank you. Thank you for bringing warmth back into my life, for reminding me what it feels like to be seen as a person, not just as an old man waiting for the end. Whatever people say, never forget, I married you because I admired your heart. You gave me something that no amount of money could ever buy. Peace. Yours always." Harold. Lena stood frozen, her hands shaking. Her vision blurred with tears. She sank slowly into the chair behind the desk, holding the letter close to her chest. Her mind was spinning. He was sick, dying, and he had given everything to her, everything. She couldn't believe it. When Harold returned home that evening, she was still sitting quietly in the living room. He looked tired, leaning slightly on his cane. "Lena?" he asked gently. "You've been quiet all evening. Is something wrong?" She looked up at him, her eyes wet. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. He stopped where he stood. "Tell you what?" "That you're sick." There was silence. The kind that says everything before words can. Harold sighed softly and walked toward her. "So you found the letter." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Why would you hide something like that from me?" He knelt beside her, his voice low and calm. Because I didn't want to burden you. You've already carried enough pain in your life. I wanted our days together to be about living, not dying. But you should have told me, she said, her voice breaking. I had a right to know. He nodded slowly. You're right. But I was afraid. Afraid you would leave. Or worse, stay only out of pity. She shook her head, crying harder. I wouldn't have left. I know, he said softly. But I didn't want to risk it. I wanted you to see me as a man, not a patient. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock. Finally, Lena whispered, How long? He looked down. The doctors aren't sure. Maybe a few months. Maybe less. Her chest tightened painfully. She wanted to scream, to cry, to ask why life was so cruel. But instead, she simply took his hand. You shouldn't have faced this alone, she said. He smiled faintly. I haven't been alone since the day I met you. That night, Lena sat awake by his side as he rested. He looked peaceful, almost like he was sleeping away his pain. She stared at him for a long time, remembering everything. The way he had smiled at the cafe, the way he had helped her family, the way he had looked at her not as a burden, but as someone worth caring for. In that moment, she realized something important. She hadn't married him for money. She hadn't married him out of fear or pity. She had married him because somehow he had become part of her heart, quietly, gently, without her even noticing. From the next morning onward, Lena's days took on a new meaning. She stopped thinking of herself as someone being taken care of. Instead, she became the one who cared. She made his tea just the way he liked it. She read to him in the evenings, stories about kindness and hope. She made sure he never missed his medicine even when he said he felt fine. One afternoon, she found him sitting on the porch looking at the sunset. Do you regret marrying me? She asked quietly. He turned to her surprised. Regret? He smiled softly. Not even for a second. You've given me more joy in these days than I've known in years. But you knew you were dying, she said. He nodded. That's why I wanted to live right. And living right meant being with someone like you. Lena's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from something deeper, gratitude, love, peace. Days turned into weeks. Harold grew weaker, but his spirit never did. He still laughed at her jokes, still asked about her mother and brother, still smiled when she entered the room. One evening he gave her a small wooden box, the same one she had seen in his study. Inside were photographs, old letters, and a gold locket. This belonged to Clara, he said. She once told me that when I find someone who reminds me of her kindness, I should give it to that person. And now I'm giving it to you. Lena held the locket tightly. I can't take this, she said. Yes, you can, he replied. It belongs with you now. She looked at him. And in that moment she saw not an old man, not a dying man, but a soul full of love. That night, as she helped him to bed, he held her hand and whispered, Promise me one thing. Anything, she said. When I'm gone, don't lock yourself away. Don't stop living. Keep smiling. Keep helping others. You have a light inside you, Lena. Don't let it fade. She nodded, her tears falling silently. I promise, he smiled gently. Good. Then I can rest easy. She stayed beside him until he fell asleep. Outside, the wind rustled softly through the trees, carrying the scent of flowers through the open window. Lena sat there for a long time, watching over him, realizing how unpredictable life truly was. A few months ago, she was struggling to feed her family. Now she was the heart of a home, not because of wealth, but because of love that had grown from kindness. That night, she whispered to herself, I'll take care of you, Harold. Until the very end. And she meant it. The week after the wedding felt like a dream and a test at the same time. Maria was still trying to understand her new life. She had never lived in a house so large before. Every corner looked polished. Every sound echoed softly through the hallways, and the air always carried the scent of fresh flowers from the garden. The house was beautiful, but also quiet in a way that made her uneasy. She often found herself sitting in the living room, listening to the ticking of the big clock and wondering what Harold was doing behind the closed door of his study. He spent long hours there, sometimes from morning until late at night. When she knocked to bring him tea or a meal, he would open the door just a little, thank her with a kind smile, and say he would eat later. She never wanted to disturb him, but her curiosity slowly grew. Once she passed by and heard him coughing hard. She stopped and waited. But when the noise stopped, she quietly moved away, pretending she hadn't heard. Harold had always been gentle with her, but he carried a sadness in his eyes she couldn't understand. Sometimes, he would look at her as if he wanted to tell her something but decided not to. Other times he would sit beside her at dinner, holding her hand longer than usual, his thumb brushing softly against her fingers. Those small moments made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. One evening, as they were having dinner together, she decided to ask about it. "You look tired lately," she said quietly. "Are you feeling okay?" He smiled faintly. "Just the weight of old age, my dear. Nothing for you to worry about." But his smile didn't reach his eyes. She noticed his hand trembled slightly as he lifted his glass. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept turning in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about his words. Something wasn't right, and her heart told her there was more to it than just old age. The next morning, Harold said he had to go into town for a doctor's appointment. He told her not to worry and that he'd be back before lunch. When he left, the house felt heavier than usual. She tried reading a book, watering the plants, and even baking, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept remembering his pale face and the way he struggled to hide his cough. After a while, she walked past his study. The door was slightly open. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The room was filled with books, framed photos, and stacks of old letters tied with ribbons. On the desk, there were documents, pens, and a small wooden box. Everything was neat, almost too neat, as if he wanted it to stay untouched. Her eyes fell on a drawer that wasn't fully closed. Out of simple habit, she pushed it in, but it slid back out slightly. Something inside caught against the edge. Curious, she gently opened it again. There, on top of a pile of envelopes, she saw one with her name written in Harold's handwriting. She froze. Her name was written carefully, with the same neat style he used when he signed letters. For a moment she stood there, unsure whether to open it or not. Part of her wanted to respect his privacy, but another part, the one filled with worry and fear, pushed her to know the truth. With shaking hands, she slid a finger under the seal and opened the envelope. Inside, there was a letter and a set of documents. The first line of the letter made her heart pound. "My dear Maria, if you are reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to tell you face to face." She sank into the chair, her eyes wide as she read on. He wrote about how meeting her had changed his life. He said that before he met her, his days had been quiet but lonely. His business was successful, his name respected, but none of it mattered because he had no one to share it with. When he saw her for the first time, tired and trying to help her family, something in him came alive again. Then came the words that made her hands tremble. "I am sick, my dear. The doctors say I have only a short time left. I didn't tell you, because I didn't want you to marry me out of pity. I wanted you to live freely, without fear or sadness, but I also wanted you to be safe after I am gone. You are kind, honest, and full of light. Everything I always wished for in life, but found too late. I want my life's work to continue through you." Tears blurred her vision as she turned the page. The documents that came with the letter confirmed everything. He had transferred ownership of his house, businesses, and savings to her. Everything now belonged to her. She covered her mouth, gasping softly. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest. He had given her not just love, but his entire legacy. At that moment, she heard the sound of the front door opening. Harold had returned from his appointment. She quickly wiped her eyes, folded the letter, and placed it back inside the envelope. When he entered the room, she turned toward him, unable to hide the tears in her eyes. He looked at her, instantly understanding what had happened. He gave a faint sigh and smiled, tired but calm. "You found it," he said softly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you tell me?" He walked closer, slowly, and sat down beside her. "Because I didn't want to see sadness in your eyes. I wanted to see hope. I wanted to remember your smile, not your tears." She shook her head. "But you shouldn't have faced it alone. We could have gone through it together." He took her hand, his palm cool and gentle. You already gave me more than you know. I wanted to make sure that when I'm gone, you'll have a life without the struggles you've known. You've brought peace to my last days. Maria broke down, resting her head on his shoulder. He held her close, his frail arm wrapped around her, whispering softly, Don't cry, my dear. I'm not afraid anymore. That night they sat in the garden together. The sky was clear, and stars shimmered like small lanterns. He told her stories from his youth, how he built his first business, how he failed, learned, and began again. She listened to every word, trying to memorize the sound of his voice, the shape of his smile, the warmth of his hand. He told her he wanted her to continue what he started, to use his resources to help others who needed hope just like she once did. From that night onward, their bond grew deeper. Every morning she would make his tea, sit with him in the sun, and talk about simple things, the weather, the garden, the people they could help. He still kept his letters and paperwork close, but now he began teaching her how everything worked, the businesses, the foundation, the people he trusted. Sometimes she would see him struggling to catch his breath, but he never complained. He always tried to smile and tell her stories that made her laugh. One afternoon, while they sat together, he looked at her and said, Promise me one thing. She turned to him, her eyes red but gentle. Anything. Promise that when I'm gone, you won't shut yourself away. Promise me you'll live, travel, and help others. Promise you'll find joy. She nodded, holding his hand tighter. I promise. He smiled, eyes glistening. Then I can rest easy. The following weeks passed quietly. He grew weaker but calmer, almost peaceful. Maria stayed by his side every moment she could. She read to him, cooked his favorite meals even when he couldn't eat much, and made sure he was never alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she found him sitting by the window watching the sky turn orange and gold. He looked at her and said, This was my favorite view. I always imagined sharing it with someone who would see the beauty in it, not the loneliness. Thank you for being that person. She knelt beside him, her voice trembling. You don't need to thank me. You gave me everything. He shook his head slightly. No. You gave me a reason to live again, even for a short while. That's worth more than anything I owned. That night, when he finally went to sleep, she sat beside his bed for a long time, holding his hand and whispering prayers. The moonlight streamed through the window, bathing the room in soft silver. She looked around the study, the books, the letters, the quiet strength of his life, and felt both heartbroken and grateful. She knew the next days would be hard, but she also knew he had given her the courage to face them. As the night deepened, she gently whispered, I'll take care of everything, I promise. And though he was half asleep, a faint smile formed on his lips. That smile, she would later remember, was the last thing he gave her before his long rest. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a promise she intended to keep, a promise to carry his kindness forward, to turn his gift into something beautiful for others. And in that silent room filled with memories, she finally understood that love in its purest form isn't measured in years, but in the hearts it touches forever. The morning after Harold passed away was quiet. The house felt still, like even the walls were mourning. The soft light from the window fell across the bed where he used to sleep, and for a moment Maria stood there unable to move. She could still hear his voice in her mind, could still see his faint smile as he drifted into his final rest. She didn't cry right away. She just stood there, holding the edge of the blanket, whispering softly, Thank you. When the sun rose fully, the world outside carried on as usual. Birds sang, the gardener watered the flowers, and somewhere far off, the church bells rang. It felt strange to her that life could continue when her heart felt so heavy. The days that followed were a blur. The lawyer came, the staff offered their condolences, and arrangements were made. Maria sat through it all, quiet and composed, though every word spoken around her sounded distant. People who had once whispered about her behind her back now looked at her with a kind of cautious respect. They knew she had been left everything, but none of them understood the depth of what that really meant. To her, the money, the house, the businesses, None of it mattered as much as the person who had believed in her when no one else did. When everyone finally left after the funeral, the silence in the mansion became unbearable. She walked into his study, the place where she had found the letter that changed her life. Everything was exactly as he had left it. The books still lined the shelves neatly, the papers were stacked in perfect order, and his reading glasses lay beside his open notebook. She sat in his chair and ran her hand over the surface of the desk. There was still a faint trace of his favorite cologne in the air. A lump rose in her throat. She closed her eyes and let the tears finally come. For hours she sat there, remembering his voice, his laughter, the way he always tried to make her smile even when he was tired. It wasn't until the sun began to set that she stood up and whispered, "I'll keep my promise. I'll make sure your name continues to help others." That night marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. In the weeks that followed, she began to learn everything Harold had taught her before he passed. His assistant, Mr. Turner, helped her understand how the businesses worked. At first, the meetings and documents overwhelmed her. There were numbers, contracts, and decisions to make, things she had never imagined she would deal with. But every time she felt lost, she remembered Harold's words, "You're stronger than you think." So she pushed forward. She spent her mornings learning and her afternoons walking through the garden, taking quiet time to think. Slowly, she began to understand how much good she could do with what he had left behind. She started by visiting the charity foundation Harold had created years ago. The staff there were surprised when she arrived. They had expected her to simply take control of the finances and stay distant. But Maria didn't want to just manage things from afar. She wanted to be involved. She listened to the stories of the families the foundation helped. Single mothers struggling to feed their children, students who couldn't afford school, and elderly people with no one to care for them. Their pain reminded her of her own past, and it strengthened her resolve. Within months, she expanded the charity. She opened new branches in smaller towns, focusing on helping families who needed food, medicine, and education. Whenever someone asked her why she cared so much, she would simply say, "Because once someone cared for me." Her story began to spread quietly. Newspapers wrote about her, calling her the young widow with a golden heart. People admired her not because she inherited wealth, but because she used it selflessly. Yet even with all the good she was doing, there were nights when loneliness crept in. She would walk through the house and find herself pausing outside Harold's study, half expecting to see him sitting there, reading under the warm lamplight. Sometimes she would enter the room, sit in his chair and whisper as if he could hear her, telling him about her day, about the children she met, the families she helped, the projects she started. Those quiet talks helped her heal. One evening, while reviewing letters from the charity office, she found an old folder tucked between some books. Inside it was a note Harold had written to himself. It was dated a few months before they met. The note said, "Find someone who can give meaning to what I've built." Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they weren't only from sadness. They were from gratitude. She finally understood that she hadn't just been his companion. She had been the person who gave purpose to the final years of his life. Time passed. Seasons changed, and Maria grew into the role Harold had prepared her for. She sold one of his smaller companies and used the money to build a free health center in her hometown, the same town where she had once worked as a waitress, barely surviving. When she returned there for the opening ceremony, many people from her past came to see her. Some were surprised by how much she had changed, but when she spoke, her humility was still the same. She told the crowd, "Years ago, I didn't know where life was leading me. I just wanted a better life for my family. I never imagined that kindness from one person would change everything. This place isn't just built from money, it's built from gratitude." The crowd applauded, and a few older women in the back wiped away tears. Her words were simple, but they touched hearts. After the event, she visited her old house. It was smaller than she remembered, and the walls were cracked from years of weather. But standing there, she smiled. It reminded her of how far she had come, not just in wealth, but in spirit. As years went by, Maria continued her work. She never remarried, not because she didn't believe in love, but because she felt that what she had shared with Harold was enough for a lifetime. He had shown her what real love meant, not just affection, but the act of giving, protecting, and believing in someone. Every year on his birthday, she visited his grave. She brought white lilies, his favorite flowers, and sat beside his resting place for hours. She would tell him everything, how the foundation had grown, how many children they had helped, and how she was keeping her promise to live fully. Sometimes she laughed softly while talking, imagining his gentle smile in return. One year, when the foundation reached its 10th anniversary under her care, she organized a large event. People from across the country came, donors, volunteers, families who had been helped. They celebrated not only the success of the foundation, but also the legacy behind it. At the end of the evening, Maria gave a short speech. Her voice was calm but filled with emotion. Years ago, I was just a young girl who didn't know where life was taking her. I met someone who believed in me more than I believed in myself. He taught me that kindness doesn't end with one person. It grows, it spreads, it changes lives. What you see here tonight isn't my achievement alone. It's his dream living on through all of us. The crowd stood in silence for a moment before bursting into applause. Some people cried openly. When the event ended, Maria stood alone under the night sky. The lights from the stage had dimmed and the stars above were bright and clear. She looked up and whispered, "I hope you're proud." A soft breeze passed through, and for a brief second she felt the same calm she used to feel when Harold was beside her. She smiled, knowing in her heart that he was. Years later, when Maria herself grew older, she continued her work until her last days. She trained young people to manage the foundation, teaching them not just about charity but about compassion. She told them, "Money can build walls or bridges. The choice is always ours. Always choose bridges." When she finally passed away peacefully, she left behind a letter, much like the one Harold had written her long ago. He had said, "To whoever reads this, remember that life is not measured by what you own but by the lives you touch. I was once given a gift of love and trust, and I tried to pass it on. Keep doing the same. Keep giving. Keep believing." After her passing, the foundation built a small garden in her memory, right next to Harold's statue. They placed a simple plaque there with her words engraved, "Kindness never dies, it only finds new hands." Visitors still come there, some knowing the full story, others just feeling the peace of the place. And every now and then, someone would leave 2 flowers, one white lily for Harold, and one yellow daisy for Maria, side by side. It became a quiet tradition, a symbol of a love that began from kindness and ended by changing the world for the better. And though their time together had been short, the bond they built lived on in every heart that found hope through their story. Because sometimes love doesn't need a lifetime to be eternal. It only needs 2 souls who believe in each other at the right moment in time.